At the age of 16, the girl heard the phrase that tore her soul. It was never my daughter. Her adoptive mother kicked her out of the house, throwing her clothes on the street as if they were garbage. Days later, a forgotten letter from the dead biological daughter surfaced, with words that would make any mother crumble. What was written there was so devastating that it would forever change the fate of that family. You were never my real daughter. The words cut through the afternoon air like sharp blades, echoing through the entire street as Margaret, a 45-year-old woman with eyes distraught with rage, threw Emma's clothes onto the pavement with a fury that seemed to come from the depths of her soul. The blue suitcase that the 16-year-old girl had received for her birthday flew through the air, crashing on the asphalt and scattering her belongings on the ground. "Mother, please," pleaded Emma through tears that flowed like rivers down her red face with despair. "What did I do? Tell me what I did wrong." Margaret paused for a moment, panting, her hands trembling with pent-up anger. Her hair was disheveled, her face sweaty, and in her eyes was something that went far beyond anger. There was a deep, ancient pain that was finally exploding like a bomb long ago. "What did you do?" she repeated in a hoarse voice. "You exist. That's what you did. You exist and she doesn't." Neighbors had gathered at the windows and gates. Donna Teresa from the house next door covered her mouth in horror. Mr. John whispered something to his wife, shaking his head negatively. The street children stopped playing and watched this devastating scene with wide eyes. Emma, still standing on the doorstep, could not process what was happening. Her legs trembled so much that she had to lean on the frame to keep from falling. This was the woman who for 13 years she had called mother. The same one who combed her hair every morning when she was little. The same one I took to school when it rained. But now at that moment Margaret looked at her as if she were a stranger, as if she were a mistake. "Mom, I don't understand," Emma murmured in a broken voice. "You always said you loved me." "You've always said I lied," burst Margaret, interrupting brutally. "I've lied all these years. I tried, Emma, I swear to God I tried to love you. But you're not Sarah. You never were and never will be. Sarah." The name fell into the air like dead weight. Emma felt something break inside her chest. Sarah, Margaret's biological daughter, who had died at the age of 8 in a car accident. The perfect girl she always tried to be without ever succeeding. "You don't play the piano like she did," Margaret continued, her words coming out like handfuls. "You don't have her blue eyes. You're not smart like she was. You're just a sloppy copy of what I lost." Emma collapsed. He literally collapsed right there, falling to his knees on the doorstep, with his hands on his face, sobbing in a way that broke the hearts of those watching. All her life she had felt that it wasn't enough, that there was something wrong with her, but she never imagined that it was that. He never imagined that his mere existence would be an offense to the memory of another person. "Get out of my way," Margaret said with a coldness that ran the blood of the neighbors. "I left my house and never came back. I don't want to see you. I can no longer see you every day reminding me of what I lost." David, Emma's adoptive father, came running at that moment. He had received a hysterical call from Mrs. Teresa at work and flew out of the company. When he saw the scene, the clothes scattered, Emma on the floor crying, Margaret standing like a fury, he felt the world come crashing down. "Margaret!" "What are you doing?" he shouted, running up to Emma and taking her in his arms. "What's going on here?" "I'm doing what I should have done years ago," Margaret replied with a frightening determination. "I'm returning it to where it belongs. Far from me." David looked at his wife as if he didn't recognize her. That woman he had married 20 years ago, whom he had decided to adopt Emma after the tragedy, seemed to have transformed into something completely different. Something cruel. "She's our daughter, Margaret." "Wow, she was never my daughter," cried Margaret. "My daughter is dead. She's been dead for 8 years and nothing will bring her back, especially not this replacement." Emma lifted her tear-soaked face and looked at Margaret one last time. Her brown eyes, which would never be blue like Sarah's, were red with tears. But there was a broken dignity here that touched the hearts of even the most distant neighbors. "I always knew you didn't really love me," she said, in a trembling but firm voice. "I've always felt it. But I never gave up trying to be a good daughter to you. Never." Margaret felt something stir in her chest at these words, but she fought that feeling. It couldn't soften now. Not after so many years of pain. "It's no use, Emma. You can try for the rest of your life, but you will never be able to be her. And I can't pretend that it doesn't kill me inside anymore." David helped Emma up and began to collect her clothes from the floor. His hands trembled with suppressed anger. He wanted to yell at Margaret. He wanted to rock her until she was back to normal. But he knew that nothing he said at that moment would help. His wife had crossed a boundary that might never be retreated. "Come on, princess," she whispered to Emma, using the affectionate nickname she had always used. "Let's get out of here." But Emma gently let go of her father's arms and took a few steps towards Margaret. The woman instinctively retreated, as if the teenager's approach was a physical danger. "I'm leaving," Emma said, wiping away tears with the back of her hand. "But I want you to know one thing, Mom, I love you. Even after all this, I love you. And if one day you change your mind, if one day you remember some good time we had, I'll be waiting. Because that's what daughters do. They wait." Margaret felt as if she had been punched in the stomach. He closed his eyes tightly, fighting back the tears that insisted on coming. He could not show weakness. "Not now, don't wait," she said in a rough voice. "Don't wait, because I'll never change my mind, never." Emma nodded slowly, as if finally understanding that this was really the final decision. He grabbed his school bag, which was lying near the door, and began to walk along the sidewalk. David followed her with the rest of his things, but before he got into the car, he turned to Margaret one last time. "You're going to regret it," he said with teary eyes. "You're going to regret it, and it's going to be too late." Margaret did not answer. She just stood there, watching the car drive away with Emma inside. The teenager stared out the back window, still crying, still hoping she ran after it, still hoping for a different ending. But Margaret didn't run. He stayed there until the car disappeared on the curve, until the neighbors returned to their homes whispering indignant comments, until silence took over the street again. Only then, when she was completely alone, did she let the tears flow. She fell sitting on the balcony stairs and cried as she hadn't cried in years. But they were not tears of regret. They were tears of relief. Finally, she had gotten rid of the daily reminder of her greatest pain. Finally, I would no longer have to pretend love that I could not feel. Finally, Sarah could rest in peace, without having an imposter take her place in the family. At least that's what Margaret said to herself, as tears fell like rain in the late afternoon. That was what she needed to believe in order to be able to live with what she had just done. Because deep down, in the most hidden place of her heart, she knew she had just cast out not only Emma, but also any chance of ever being happy again. But to understand how we got to this devastating moment, we need to go back in time. To go back to a time when Margaret still believed in love, still had hope, was still able to dream of a different future. 8 years earlier, the sound of the uncontrolled engine cut through the dawn like a cry of despair. The blue car skidded on the rain-soaked corner, completely lost control and flipped 3 times before crashing into a century-old tree on the side of the road. The sound of shattering metal echoed through the silent forest, followed by an even more eerie silence. Margaret woke up in the hospital 2 days later, with her head bandaged and her heart torn into millions of pieces. The first thing he did when he managed to speak was to ask for Sarah. The second was to collapse when he heard the answer. "I'm sorry. Mrs. Margaret," the doctor said in that careful voice that health workers use when they have to deliver the world. "We did everything we could, but the injuries were too serious." His daughter did not resist. The words entered Margaret's ears like dull knives, tearing apart every bit of hope she still carried. Sarah, her 8-year-old Sarah, with bright blue eyes and a smile that lit up any room. His little pianist who played Mozart as if she had been born for it. "Your perfect girl was dead." "No," whispered Margaret, shaking her head hard. "No, no, no. I want to see her. I want to see my daughter." David held her hand, also with tears streaming down his face. He had lost Sarah too, but in this moment his grief was twofold, for the daughter who was gone and for the wife who was shattering before his eyes. Love. She has already been buried, he murmured in a broken voice. "You were in a coma for 2 days. I had to make the decisions myself." Margaret let out a cry that didn't seem human. It was the sound of a mother being torn apart by grief, the echo of a heart that had just been torn from her chest. She screamed until she no longer had a voice, until the doctors had to sedate her again. The months that followed were the darkest of Margaret's life. She had lost not only her daughter, but also any ability to feel joy, hope, or even the will to live. The house was plunged into a sepulchral silence. Sarah's room remained exactly as she had left it, with the books open on the study table and the piano scores still on the instrument. David tried everything to get Margaret out of that black hole. Therapy, travel, endless conversations. Nothing worked. His wife had become a shadow of herself, wandering the house like a ghost in search of something she would never find again. It was on one of these aimless walks through the house that Margaret stopped in front of the piano. The keys were covered in dust, but Sarah's sheet music was still there, waiting for small, skilled fingers that would never play them again. She sat down on the bench and, for the first time in months, played a note. Only one. The sound echoed through the empty house like a wail. "I can't do it anymore," he whispered into the void. "I can't live without it." It was David who found the orphanage's flyers on the kitchen table a few weeks later. Margaret was there drinking cold coffee and looking at the photos of children waiting for adoption, as if observing a store window. "What is this?" he asked, sitting down next to her. "A chance," Margaret replied without taking her eyes off the papers. "A chance to try again. A chance to be a mother again." David was silent for a long time. He understood his wife's pain. He shared it. But he also knew that no child could replace Sarah. No child should have this impossible responsibility. "Margaret, love, no child will bring Sarah back." "I know," she replied in a very calm voice. "But maybe a child can help me live again. Maybe it can help us build something new on top of this pain." That's how they met Emma, a 3-year-old girl with curly brown hair and a shy smile that melted David's heart instantly. She had been in the orphanage since she was a baby, abandoned at the door of the institution with only a note. "Please take care of her better than I can. She's beautiful," David whispered, taking Emma in his arms during their first visit. The girl snuggled up to him naturally, as if she knew she had found a father. Margaret watched from afar, analyzing every detail of the child. The brown eyes instead of Sarah's blue ones, curly hair instead of straight hair, the quiet personality instead of the extroverted. It was different in everything, and maybe that was a good thing. Perhaps it would be easier to love someone who did not bring him constant memories of the daughter he had lost. "She can be ours," Margaret said, reaching out to touch Emma's face. The girl looked at her with those big, curious eyes, and for a moment Margaret felt something stir in her chest. It wasn't the same overwhelming love he felt for Sarah, but it was something. It was a start. The first years were in fact easier. Emma was a sweet, obedient child, eager to please the foster parents who had taken her out of the uncertain life of the orphanage. She called Margaret mother with touching dedication, hugged her every morning, and followed her instructions to the letter. Margaret struggled to respond. He took Emma to school, prepared her favorite meals, bought her nice clothes. From the outside, they looked like a normal family recovering from a tragedy. But inside, Margaret struggled daily with a coldness she couldn't explain. "Why can't I love her like I loved Sarah?" he asked David one night after putting Emma to sleep. "Because she's not Sarah," he replied gently. "And that's okay. The love for each child is unique. It doesn't have to be the same." But Margaret wanted it to be the same. She wanted to feel that burst of motherly love that consumed her when she looked at Sarah. He wanted Emma to awaken in her the same passion, the same blind devotion, the same sense that she would be able to kill or die for that child. Instead, what she felt was a controlled affection, a rational affection, a love that seemed more like a duty fulfilled than a natural emotion. Things started to take a turn for the worse when Emma turned 7 and asked to learn piano. Margaret stood paralyzed in front of the instrument that hadn't been played in 4 years, watching the girl sit on the same stool where Sarah had spent so many hours practicing. "Can I try to play this song?" asked Emma, pointing to one of Sarah's sheet music that was still on the piano. "No," cried Margaret with a violence that frightened everyone, including herself. "It doesn't play that song, never." Emma drew back, tears in her eyes, not understanding what she had done wrong. David hurried to comfort her, but the damage was done. From that day on, a shadow settled between Margaret and Emma, a distance that would only grow with time. Margaret began to see Sarah in everything that Emma was not. The girl played the piano, but not with Sarah's naturalness. She was intelligent, but not genius like Sarah. She was beautiful, but she didn't have Sarah's angelic beauty. And the older she grew, the more Margaret felt betrayed by these differences. "Why can't you be better? he asked Emma when she missed a note on the piano. "Why don't you try harder?" Emma tried harder than any child should try. She studied late, practiced piano for hours, tried to guess what Margaret wanted her to be. But it was never enough, and it would never be enough. David tried to compensate for his wife's growing coldness with double doses of affection. He genuinely loved Emma. He saw in her the daughter he always wanted to have. But her dedication to the girl only added to Margaret's resentment, who felt increasingly isolated in her own home. "You love her more than you loved Sarah," Margaret accused one night, after seeing David helping Emma with her homework. "It's not true," David replied wearily. "I love differently. And you can also love differently, Margaret. Emma doesn't have to be like Sarah to be our daughter." "She's not our daughter," burst Margaret. "She's a stranger we brought home because I was desperate. She doesn't have our blood. She doesn't have our history. She doesn't have anything of our own." It was the first time Margaret had verbalized that thought that had been quietly growing for years. Emma, who had gone down to drink water, heard everything from the stairs. At the age of 9, she finally understood why her mother never looked at her with the same love she saw in the eyes of other mothers. From that day on, Emma stopped trying to be Sarah. He stopped trying to win Margaret's impossible love. Instead, she began to accept the crumbs of affection she received, grateful to have at least David and a roof over her head. But Margaret interpreted this resigned acceptance as indifference. If Emma wasn't going to fight for her love, if she wasn't going to try to be special like Sarah had been, then she really didn't deserve to be loved. The distance between them became an abyss. Dry conversations about school obligations, meals in silence, mechanical hugs only on social occasions to keep up appearances. And then came that fateful day when Emma, at 16, decided to try one last time. He decided to play Sarah's favorite song on the piano, thinking that maybe it was a gesture of love, a way of honoring the sister he never met. Margaret entered the room just as the familiar notes began to spring from the piano. For a moment she closed her eyes and could almost imagine that it was Sarah there, touching again. But when she opened her eyes and saw Emma, not Sarah, never Sarah, something broke apart within her for good. "How dare you?" hissed Margaret, with a fury that had been building for 13 years. "How dare you play her music?" "I just wanted to—" Emma began, but was interrupted by a slap that knocked her off the piano stool. "You didn't want anything," cried Margaret. "You wanted to desecrate her memory. You wanted to pretend to be her once again. But you'll never be, Emma, never!" It was at that moment that David arrived home and found the two in that explosive situation. It was at that moment that Margaret finally let out all the poisonous words she had been keeping for more than a decade. It was at that moment that she decided she couldn't fake it anymore. And that's how we got to that terrible day on the sidewalk, with Emma being kicked out of the house and Margaret finally telling all the cruel truth she had kept for years. Because sometimes pain turns into anger, and sometimes anger turns into cruelty, and sometimes cruelty destroys the very thing that could save us. 3 weeks had passed since that devastating day on the sidewalk. 3 weeks that seemed like 3 years for everyone involved in that family tragedy. Emma now lived in a temporary foster home on the other side of town. It was a clean and organized place, run by a kind lady named Donna Regina, but it would never be a real home. The other children there were younger, most victims of neglect or abandonment. Emma at 16 was practically an adult by comparison, carrying a pain that the others couldn't even understand. "You have a visitor," announced Donna Regina on a Thursday afternoon, with that gentle smile she always used to try to ease difficult situations. Emma looked up from the book she pretended to read. In fact, she spent most of her time looking at the pages without being able to concentrate on the words. His heart leapt desperately. Would it be Margaret? Had she finally changed her mind? But the one who appeared at the door of the room was David, with swollen eyes and an appearance of someone who had not slept for weeks. Emma felt a mixture of relief and disappointment that almost knocked her out of her chair. "Hi, Princess," he said hoarsely, opening his arms. Emma ran to him like a small child, hugging him with desperate strength as tears streamed down her face. He was the only connection she had left to the family she had lost, the only person in the world who still called her by her affectionate childhood nickname. "How are you?" asked David, pulling her back a little to observe her face. Emma was thinner, paler, with deep dark circles under her eyes. "Donna Regina said you haven't been eating properly." "How can I eat?" whispered Emma. "How can I do anything normal knowing that she hates me so much?" David felt his heart break once again. In recent weeks, he had tried everything to make Margaret change her mind. Conversations, supplications, even threats of divorce. Nothing worked. His wife had entrenched herself in her decision, as if hiding behind a wall of hatred. "She doesn't hate you, Emma," David lied, "because sometimes lies are kinder than truths. She is sick. The pain of Sarah's loss was never handled properly. She needs help. She said I'm a shoddy substitute," Emma said in a trembling voice. "She said she can't see me every day because I remind her of what she lost." How is this not hate? David had no answer to that. How to explain to a wounded teenager that sometimes love and hate are feeling so close that they are confused? How to explain that Margaret might hate her precisely because, deep down, she loved her and it terrified her? "I brought your things," he said, changing the subject as he handed over a large suitcase. "Your books, your photos, that teddy bear you've been sleeping cuddled with since you were little." Emma picked up the suitcase carefully, as if it were made of crystal. Inside were the pieces of life she had built in Margaret and David's home, a life that now seemed to have been just a dream. "And the mother?" she asked, still clinging to that word. "How is she?" David hesitated. How could she tell Emma that Margaret had turned the house into an even darker mausoleum than it had been before? That she spent her days locked in Sarah's room, talking to photos? That he had stopped eating, grooming, doing anything remotely resembling living? "She's processing all of that," he said diplomatically. But the truth was far more disturbing than David wanted to admit. Margaret had plunged into an unhealthy obsession with Sarah's memory. She had scattered photos of the dead girl all over the house, replacing all the images that included Emma. He had bought Sarah new clothes, as if she was still going to grow up. She had even started setting the table for 3 people every night, leaving a plate for her daughter who would never come home. "Will she forgive me one day?" asked Emma with heartbreaking naivete. David hugged her tighter, fighting back his own tears. How to answer this question when he himself did not know the answer? How to give hope to a girl who had already suffered too much? "I don't know, Princess," he whispered in her ear, "but I know you didn't do anything wrong. You've never done anything wrong. You are a wonderful girl and any mother would be lucky to have you as a daughter." Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Margaret sat on the floor of Sarah's room, surrounded by photo albums and letters she had written to her dead daughter. She had lost even more weight in the past few weeks, and her appearance was frightening. Disheveled hair, dirty clothes, glassy eyes of someone who had completely lost touch with reality. "Today she would be 16, Margaret whispered to a photo of Sarah at the age of 8. "She would be beautiful, wouldn't she? More beautiful than any other girl her age." She kissed the photo and pressed it to her chest, rocking back and forth like cradling a baby. "She tried to replace you. Sarah, that girl tried to take her place, play her songs, sleep in her house, but I didn't let him. I kicked her out. Now it's just me and you again, my daughter." As it should have always been. Margaret's mental state had deteriorated dramatically since Emma's expulsion. Without the teenage girl's presence to channel her anger, all that pent-up pain had turned inward, creating an alternate reality where Sarah was still alive, still needed her, could still come back. David found his wife in this state when he came home after visiting Emma. She was dancing alone in the living room, to music that only she could hear, whispering affectionate words into the empty air. "Margaret," he called carefully, as if trying not to frighten an injured animal. "Did you eat anything today?" She stopped dancing and looked at him strangely, as if she didn't recognize him. "Who are you?" she asked in a childish voice. "What are you doing in my house?" David felt the ground disappear from beneath his feet. His wife had officially lost touch with reality. The guilt he felt for Emma multiplied by 1,000. He had let an innocent teenager be destroyed by a woman who clearly needed psychiatric hospitalization. "It's me, love." "Oh, David, your husband." Margaret frowned as if she were trying to remember something very far away. "David," she repeated slowly. "David died in the accident. With Sarah, they died together and left me alone." "No, Margaret, I didn't die. I'm here with you." "And Sarah?" "Sarah left, but you have to accept that. You have to get back to reality. The mention of Sarah brought Margaret back to the present moment. His eyes became focused again, but with a terrifying lucidity. "Don't talk about Sarah," she hissed. "You have no right to talk about her after bringing that thing for our house. You desecrated our daughter's memory." "Emma was our daughter too," burst David, finally losing his temper. "For 13 years she was our daughter. She loved you, Margaret. I loved you more than you deserved." Margaret laughed, a high-pitched, disturbing sound that echoed through the empty house. "She never loved me," she said with frightening certainty. "She pretended. Just as I pretended to love her. We both knew it was a lie. We both knew it would never be enough." David looked at the woman he had married 20 years earlier and could not recognize anything of the person he had once loved. The grief had turned Margaret into something cruel and unrecognizable. "I'm going to get Emma," he announced with a new determination in his voice. "I'm going to bring her back home and you'll have to accept it. This is her house too. If you bring that girl here," Margaret said with terrifying calm, "I'll leave forever and you'll never see me again." It was an ultimatum. David would have to choose between his wife, who was losing her sanity, and his adopted daughter, who didn't deserve any of it. It was an impossible, cruel, inhumane choice. But when he looked into Margaret's blank eyes, David realized that perhaps there was nothing left to save there. Maybe the woman he had loved had died along with Sarah in that accident 8 years ago, and he was just taking too long to accept it. "Then maybe you'd better leave," he whispered, his heart shattering into a million pieces. "Because I'm not going to abandon Emma, not again." Margaret smiled, a blank, icy smile that didn't even come close to the eyes. "So you've made your choice," she said. "Just like I did mine a long time ago." That night, David slept on the couch for the first time in 20 years of marriage, and Margaret slept hugging Sarah's pictures, whispering lullabies to a girl who would never hear them again. The gulf between them had become unbridgeable, and Emma, innocent in her foster home, had no idea that her mere existence had become the cause of a war that was destroying the only parents she had ever known. Sometimes love turns into obsession, and sometimes obsession destroys everything it touches, including itself. 2 months had passed since David had made his final choice. Margaret had left home on a cold September morning, carrying only a suitcase and leaving behind 20 years of marriage. She moved into a small apartment on the other side of town, a gloomy place where she could live alone with her obsessions without bothering anyone. Emma had returned home with David, but the house was no longer the same. The hallways seemed to echo with ghosts from the past, and the piano remained covered by a white sheet, like a monument to the pain that had torn that family apart. "You don't have to tiptoe," David said to Emma one Sunday morning as she quietly passed through the room. "This is your home. It always has been." But Emma knew that this was not the case. Even without Margaret there, her presence hung over every room like a heavy shadow. Emma felt as if she were an intruder in her own home, treading carefully so as not to awaken the ghosts Margaret had left behind. On the other side of town, Margaret had turned her small apartment into a kind of sanctuary for Sarah. The walls were covered with pictures of the girl at all ages she had lived. There were even digitally edited photos showing what Sarah would have looked like if she had grown up. At 10, 12, 16, Margaret would spend hours looking at these images, talking to them as if Sarah could hear her. "Soon you'll be 17, Margaret whispered to a doctored photo of Sarah's teenage self. "You would be so beautiful, my daughter. So perfect. Not like that cheap imitation they tried to put in its place." Loneliness had intensified Margaret's madness. Without David to try to bring her back to reality, without Emma to serve as a target for her anger, she had completely sunk into her sick fantasy. She even went out to buy birthday gifts for Sarah, carefully storing them in a special drawer. It was on one of these outings to buy a gift that Margaret found something that would change everything. She was in an antique store, looking for a vintage brooch she thought Sarah would love, when she bumped into an elegant grey-haired woman flipping through some old books. "Excuse me," Margaret said automatically, but the woman turned and stared at her with a strange expression. "Margaret?" asked the woman, frowning. "Margaret Oliveira." Margaret looked better at the woman and felt a jolt of recognition. It was Helena, a former piano teacher of Sarah's. She had given private lessons to the girl for 2 years before the accident. "Professor Helena," said Margaret in a trembling voice. I didn't expect it. "My God, how thin you are," Helena said with genuine concern. "I heard about your divorce. And about Emma. The whole city is commenting." Margaret felt her face heat with shame and anger. Of course, the whole town was talking about how she had kicked her adopted daughter out of the house. Of course, she had become a subject of gossip for people who didn't understand anything about her pain. "It wasn't divorce," Margaret murmured. "It was a temporary separation. And about Emma, I'd rather not talk." Helena watched her with that penetrating gaze that teachers develop over the years, as if she could see through the lies and evasions. "Can I ask you a question?" said Helena gently. "Why did you do that to the girl? She always seemed to love you so much." Margaret felt the tears rise to her eyes without warning. It had been so long since no one had spoken of Emma kindly. It had been so long that no one had questioned her actions with compassion instead of judgment. "Because she wasn't Sarah," Margaret whispered, her voice broken. "She would never be Sarah, and I couldn't pretend I could love her like I really loved my daughter." Helena was silent for a long moment, processing those words. Then slowly, she took Margaret by the arm and guided her to a small cafe inside the antique shop. "Sit here," Helena said with soft authority. "I need to tell you something. Something Sarah asked me never to tell, but that maybe it's time for you to know." Margaret felt her heart race. Anything about Sarah stirred up in her a mixture of desperate hope and paralyzing fear. "Sarah asked me not to tell what?" she asked, barely able to form the words. Helena took a deep breath, as if preparing to carry a very large weight. "On the day of the accident," she began slowly, "a few hours before you left for that trip, Sarah came to the house. She was very agitated, very worried about something." Margaret leaned forward, hanging on to every word. "Worried about what?" "With you, Margaret. With how you were dealing with Emma's arrival. Sarah told me that she knew you were trying so hard, but that she also knew it was hard for you to love Emma the way you loved her." Margaret felt the world start to turn. Did Sarah know? Did her perfect daughter, her adored girl, know that she was struggling to love Emma? Did she say anything else?" asked Margaret in a trembling voice. "I said a lot," Helena replied, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "She asked me to write a letter to you in case something happened to her. Sarah has always been a very intuitive girl, very sensitive. I think she sensed that something bad was about to happen." Margaret stopped breathing. A letter from Sarah. A letter that his daughter had written before she died. Where is that letter?" she whispered. "I gave it to Emma," Helena said simply. "Sarah specifically asked that if something happened to her, I should give the letter to Emma, so she could give it to you at the right time." The world stopped. It completely stopped. Margaret felt as if she had been punched in the stomach that left her breathless. Did Emma have a letter from Sarah all these years ago? A letter Sarah had written specifically for her, Margaret. "Has Emma got a letter from Sarah?" repeated Margaret, hardly believing what she was hearing. "There is," Helena confirmed. "I gave it to her a few days after the funeral. Sarah made me promise that only Emma could decide when the right time would be to give you the letter." Margaret got up from her chair so quickly that she almost fell. His legs trembled, his heart beat like an uncontrolled drum. Emma had kept a letter from Sarah for all these years. All those years when Margaret had treated her coldly, when she had blamed her for not being perfect, when she had cruelly compared her to her dead daughter. Emma knew something that could change everything. I need to talk to Emma," Margaret murmured, already picking up her bag. "I need to see this letter." "Margaret," Helen called, taking hold of her arm. "Are you sure you're ready for this? Sarah wrote that letter with a lot of love, but also with a lot of knowledge about the two of you. It may be that what is written there changes your perspective on many things." But Margaret was no longer listening. Her mind was in total panic, processing the revelation that there had been a final message from Sarah, waiting for her all these years. A message that Emma, the girl she had kicked out of the house calling her a sloppy substitute, had treasured away. She ran out of the antique store, leaving Helena alone with her worries. On the streets, Margaret ran like a possessed woman, ignoring curious glances from passers-by. I needed to get home. He needed to talk to Emma. He needed to find out what Sarah had written in that letter, because maybe, just maybe, her perfect daughter had left the words that could save both Margaret and Emma from the tragedy they had created together. Perhaps Sarah, even dead, could still teach her mother the true meaning of love. Margaret arrived at her old home in a state of total panic. Her hands trembled so much that she couldn't even ring the bell properly. The heartbeat in my neck, throat, ears. 8 years. 8 years Emma had kept a letter from Sarah, and she had no idea. David opened the door with an expression of utter shock. Margaret was unrecognizable, thinner than she had ever been, with deep dark circles, disheveled hair, wrinkled clothes. She looked like a ghost of herself. "Margaret, what are you doing here?" he asked cautiously, as if talking to someone who could explode at any moment. "I need to talk to Emma," Margaret said in a desperate voice. "Please, David, it is urgent. It's about Sarah." The mention of Sarah's name made David stiffen his face. How many times had Margaret used the memory of her dead daughter as a weapon against Emma? How many times had he invoked Sarah's name to justify his cruelty? "Emma's not here," he said coldly. "And even if I was, I don't know if it would be a good idea." "She's got a letter," Margaret burst out, interrupting. "Emma has a letter Sarah wrote to me before she died. Helena told me everything. Sarah knew she was going to die and wrote a letter." David was paralyzed. In all these years, Emma had never mentioned any letters, but he knew the girl well enough to know that she was able to keep a secret for love, able to carry a weight alone if she thought it was best for everyone. "If that's true," David began, but was interrupted by a soft voice coming from the stairs. "It's true." The two turned to see Emma slowly descending the steps. She was different, more mature, more serene, as if she had aged years in a few months. In his hands he carried an envelope yellowed by time. Margaret felt her legs wobble when she saw Emma. The girl she had so cruelly expelled from the house was there, in front of her, possibly holding Sarah's last words. "Emma," whispered Margaret, tears already streaming down her face. "I always knew that one day I would have to give you this," Emma said with impressive calm. "Sarah asked me to wait for the right moment. I think that moment has come." She went down the rest of the stairs and stood in front of Margaret, holding out the envelope with hands that trembled only a little. "She loved you very much." "Mom," Emma said, and the word mom came naturally, without resentment, without anger. "Even though she knew how hard it was for you to love me, she never doubted your heart." Margaret took the envelope as if it were made of crystal. Her fingers traced the name written in Sarah's childish but careful handwriting, "To Mommy when she needs to remember." "Read," Emma whispered. "Read it now in front of all of us." Margaret opened the envelope with extreme care. Inside were 2 sheets of paper, filled with Sarah's neat handwriting. She took a deep breath and began to read aloud, her voice breaking with each word. "Dear Mommy, if you're reading this, it means something terrible has happened to me. I know you must have very, very heartache. I know you must be feeling like the world has ended. But I need you to know some very important things before it's too late." Margaret stopped, sobbing. David came over and put his hand on her shoulder. Emma remained where she was, silent tears streaming down her face. "First thing," Margaret continued reading, "Emma is a gift God has given us. I know you think she's here to replace me, but it's not true, Mom. She came to complete me. When Emma got home, I finally understood what it's like to be an older sister. I finally understood what it is to protect someone, to care for someone, to love someone without expecting anything in return." Margaret looked at Emma through her tears. The girl was crying too, but there was a soft smile on her lips. "Second thing," Margaret continued, "Emma taught me things I would never have learned on my own. He taught me that we don't have to be the same to love ourselves. It taught me that family is not about having the same blood. It's about choosing to love every day. It taught me that being special isn't about being perfect. It's about being true." Margaret's voice was completely choked now, but she forced herself to continue. "Third thing, and this is the most important of all, Emma loves you more than you deserve, Mommy. I see how she looks at you. She loves you with the kind of love that doesn't give up, that doesn't demand anything in return. It's the purest love I've ever seen in my life. And if something happens to me, please, please don't throw that love away." Margaret had to stop reading. He was sobbing so much that he could no longer form words. David held the paper and continued reading through it. "Mom, I know it's hard to love 2 daughters in different ways. I know you're afraid you'll forget me if you love Emma too much, but I want you to know that loving Emma won't erase my memory. Go honor her, because it was Emma who taught me that our hearts have no limit. There's room for everyone we choose to love." Emma approached Margaret and gently took her hand. "There's more," she whispered. "The most important part." David took a deep breath and continued reading. If you're reading this and you're angry with Emma, please stop. She stops and remembers that she also lost someone. She lost the sister she just learned to love. If you're reading this and you're thinking of sending her away, please don't. She needs you as much as you need her. You two can save each other if you let them. Margaret looked at Emma, and for the first time in 8 years, she was able to see the real girl. Not as a failed substitute for Sarah, not as a painful reminder of what she had lost, but as Emma. Like the brave girl who had kept a precious letter for 8 years waiting for the right moment. Like the generous teenager who still called her mother after being kicked out of the house. Like the daughter she had been too blind to see. "Emma," whispered Margaret, letting go of the paper and taking the girl's face in her hands. "My Emma, my daughter. My God, what did I do to you?" "You were in pain," Emma replied simply. "I always understood. I never stopped understanding." David finished reading the letter. "Lastly, Mommy, I want you to know that wherever I am right now, I am happy. I'm happy because I had the best mother in the world for the 8 years I had. I'm glad I left Emma with you to take care of. And I'll be even happier if you remember that family is about love, not loss. I love you forever, your Sarah. And there's a part for me too," Emma said softly, picking up the part. "P.S. Emma, if you're reading this together with Mom, thank you for waiting for the right moment. Thank you for being the bravest sister I could have asked for. And remember that you are a real sister, not a stepsister. Mommy's heart has room for both of us. Only sometimes does she forget where she left the key. Help her find it, please." The silence that followed was broken only by Margaret's sobs. She pulled Emma into a desperate embrace, squeezing her as if she wanted to merge the two hearts into one. "Forgive me," cried Margaret in Emma's ear. "For God's sake, forgive me. I was the worst mother in the world. I treated you like you were to blame for my pain when you were the only one who could cure me of it." "I forgave you a long time ago," Emma whispered, returning the hug with the same intensity. "I forgave you the day you kicked me out of the house because I understood that you weren't kicking me out. You were kicking out your own pain." David joined in the embrace, and for the first time in 8 years, the three of them were truly united. Not as a family trying to forget a tragedy, but as a family that had learned to carry its pain together. "Sarah was right," Margaret whispered through tears. "You two saved me. Emma, you saved me every day for 13 years and I was too blind to see." "And you saved me too," Emma replied. "You took me out of the orphanage. He gave me a home. He gave me a father. He gave me a sister. Even when he couldn't love myself the way he wanted, he never let me be in need." Weeks later, Margaret was back home. She had started therapy, was taking medication for depression, and was slowly learning to live with her pain instead of being controlled by it. The piano was discovered. Emma returned to playing, but now she played not to replace Sarah, but to honor her. He played the favorite songs of the sister he had never met in person, but whom he had loved from a distance. "Do you want to learn this song?" asked Margaret one Sunday afternoon, holding up a new sheet music. "Is it hard?" asked Margaret, sitting next to her daughter on the piano bench. "A lot," laughed Emma, "but we can learn together. Sarah wrote in the letter that she wanted us to do things together." Margaret smiled, the first genuine smile she had given in 8 years. "So let's learn together. And when we can play properly, we play for her. She'll love it," Emma said with certainty. "Wherever she is, she'll love to know that we finally get it." And that's how Margaret learned that true love doesn't have to be the same to be real. She learned that an adopted daughter can love as deeply as a biological daughter. He learned that Emma had never tried to replace Sarah. She had tried to be herself, patiently waiting for Margaret to have room in her heart for more than one kind of love. Sarah was right. The heart has no limits. There is room for everyone we choose to love. And sometimes, when we lose someone, the person who can teach us this again is right in front of us, waiting patiently for us to find the key to our own heart. Emma was never a shoddy substitute for Sarah. Emma has always been exactly what she was meant to be, herself. And that, Margaret finally understood, was more than enough. It was perfect. Comment family of the heart. So I know you've made it to the end of this heartwarming story, and mark your comment with a beautiful heart. And just like the story of Margaret and Emma, I have another touching narrative to share with you. Just click on the video that is now appearing on your screen and embark on another journey that will stir your emotions. A big hug and I'll wait for you there.